Hi folks, this is video number 42 and the title is The Result of Springtime at the Lake. Springtime at the lake. Grandma and Grandpa Perry had a cottage on the larger northern end of Lake Sheridan. It was on the east side of the lake. They lived most of the year on Hermans Avenue in the north end of Scranton. The first week of April every year, they moved up to the cottage. It was my job to put the water line in the lake. Grandpa had a terrace cut in the slope about halfway up from the lake. He had a glider swing and also the water pump sitting on that little patio. He had black 1.5-inch tubing. Half went to and into the water. The rest was the supply line to the cottage. They used lake water for dishes and washing up. If you had to relieve yourself, it was out the back door and a 20-yard hike to the old outhouse. We hauled drinking and cooking water from a local spring in gallon jugs. The water line that went into the water had a check valve on the inlet end, and it was hose clamped to a sawhorse made from 1/2-inch black pipe. I put Grandpa's old hip boots on. They had a few holes in them. I wore them for protection from stepping on rocks or sticks. Leaks didn't matter because I had to surface dive down in 10 feet of water and shove the legs of that sawhorse into the ground. It had to be that deep so no one would hit it with a prop from a motorboat. Being it was always the first week of April, sometimes the lake was still half covered with ice. The water was super cold. I was always the first one to go swimming every year. Grandpa worked in the mines starting at 6 years old, leading mules, pulling coal cars up to the tipple in the colliery. He retired as a mining supervisor. He once told me that if you knew how to go, you could go underground in the Carbondale area and not come out until you got down around the Hazelton area. That's somewhere between 60 to 80 miles. Coal was king. After leaving the mines, he got a job as a maintenance man at the Scranton State Hospital. If there was any paint left from a project, he would bring it home and save it to do some painting at the cottage. It was funny. He might have half a can of red, a third of a can of yellow, etc. We poured them all in a 5-gallon bucket and mixed them up. Sometimes we'd end up with some kind of blue, sometimes a funky green. One year it was either flesh-colored or a funky pumpkin. I painted the outhouse, the cottage, the 55 steps to the dock, and the old wooden rowboat. Whenever Grandpa would tell me, "I need your help Saturday, Doc," whatever I had planned was off the table. My parents felt that way too. Does honor your mother and father come to mind? If you want to be there by 9:30, I'd be up at 6 and cook and eat a couple eggs, toast, and milk, and jump on the bike and hit the road. It's 5 miles from here to where the cottage was. I'd be there by 7:30, just leaning back in a chair on the cottage patio, basking in the sun, waiting for them to get up. I wouldn't know they were up until one of them came out and headed for the outhouse. Grandma would make me a couple eggs and toast, and then Grandpa and I would go to work. Grandpa was in the Navy during World War I. He made 11 trips across the North Atlantic. Their sister ship was sunk less than half a mile from them. He couldn't swim a lick. I really looked up to Grandpa. He taught me how to row a boat, how to put a gob of worms on a hook. His nickname was the Gob. It was even on the mailbox. It was a Navy thing. When I was contemplating leaving P&G to work for myself, I came to realize that I had led a similar life as his. For some reason, when I was weighing the pros and cons, a question popped into my head. I wonder if Grandpa would approve. I invented my first job. I was sitting on the front porch with Mom watching Mr. Thomas load hay on his wagon. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas had the farm that bordered our place. They had 4 kids, a son and 3 daughters. They were all in college. Mr. Thomas was working alone. He would pull the tractor and wagon forward some, get off, and throw a few bales on the wagon. Then repeat the process. The bales were really scattered. Well, he headed down to the barn with his first load. At that time I mentioned to Mom that Mr. Thomas had to get on and off the tractor an awful lot. She agreed. I asked if she thought Mr. Thomas would mind if I rolled the bales into groups for him. Mom thought it was an excellent idea. She told me to watch for cars before I crossed the road. I walked out to the road, looked both ways, and ran across and jumped the big ditch on the other side. I was now in the field. I couldn't pick up the bales, but I could roll them. I put them in groups of 10 or 12. I was just finishing the last group when Mr. Thomas returned with the tractor and wagon. I hoped he wasn't mad. He got off the tractor at the first group as I was walking up. He reached in his pocket and gave me a quarter. He told me to have Dad get me a pair of leather gloves like his. Then he told me that at any time I saw the tractor and wagon coming up the hill, I had a job. You see, the reason I couldn't pick up the bales to move them is that they came up to my chest. I was 6 years old. Dad had me driving the '48 Chevy pickup with the wraparound windows when I was 7. I had to pull the station wagon down and up the hill when it got cold and wouldn't start. When I was 11, Mr. Thomas had his middle daughter, Virginia, teach me how to drive the tractor. I rode with her all morning. After lunch, I took over pulling the hay wagon. I baled hay, cut corn, milked cows, etc. for all the farmers around us when growing up. I bought a car, my first life insurance policy, had money in the bank. One year I made $2,500 at $1 an hour during the summer. I worked 16 hours a day for one farmer with 60 head of cattle and 2 farms. I helped others, including Mr. Thomas, as well. I went on to work at a heavy equipment school as an administrative secretary and took the opportunity to learn to operate all the machines. When I got my draft notice, I enlisted to go to heavy equipment mechanics school at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. When I was about 15, I made a decision to always learn as much as possible about everything I encountered. That decision, along with the skills and work ethic I acquired from my dad, Grandpa Perry, Mr. Thomas, formed the kind of a man I would be. All that and working at the school, being responsible for a $1.3 million budget at 17 years old, and going to a mechanics school for a year, learning to tear down and rebuild everything from chainsaws to 20-ton drag lines, became the basis for my entire adult working life. I'm 68 now, and the next generation has things well in hand. But it is nice to contribute once in a while. Well, folks, that is the result of springtime at the lake and the result and what it meant to me. All the best.